I'm Kaylee.
Hi, I'm Jackie.
To give a brief overview, the movie Still Alice is a realistic and emotional story about a woman who is battling Alzheimer's disease.
Today, we are going to discuss the film Still Alice in comparison towards important concepts in interpersonal and intrapersonal conflict.
Applying interpersonal conflict to Still Alice, we look at how Alice recognizes the difference in her typical behavior. She begins to question her identity as a professor at Columbia University. She gives a presentation and forgets a key concept, making her question of who she is. She's qualified, and throughout the movie, we see how she handles this internal fight against not only Alzheimer's, but herself.
Personal conflict is an expressed struggle between at least two interdependent parties who perceive incompatible goals, scarce resources, and interference from others when trying to achieve their goals.
When we consider Alzheimer's disease and conflict, it's important for us to interpret this on a micro and a macro level. Thinking of Alzheimer's disease on a familial level, we can think of Alice's family's initial denial/disbelief of her diagnosis as a micro-level conflict.
It is not until Alice's condition exacerbates itself that we see family conflict, reaching a macro level. Examples of this can be evident when Alice is getting lost, missing plans, forgetting names and words. These types of conflicts can evolve and ultimately become dangerous for both Alice and her family.
So, now let's talk about Alzheimer's and the complexities of conflict.
In terms of dyadic communication or interactions between individuals, in the film, Alice's children were presented with the opportunity to take a genetic test to determine if they were a carrier of the Alzheimer's gene. This specific conflict drove a wedge between Alice's youngest daughter, Lydia, and her elder siblings, Tom and Anna. This created a toxic triangle. Lydia refused to take the genetic test. Ultimately, this made her orientation toward conflict evident. This caused a rift between the siblings, making Lydia outnumbered and of low power in this scenario.
The movie also depicts constructive dyads of communication. It's a scene between Alice's communication with her doctors, along with her husband's involvement in these communication interactions. Conflict elements that were included was Anna's intention was for her mother to be at the event. Lydia wanted to come to her mother's defense, saying that she's worthy of exercising this ability to write it down. This contributed to the problem because it harmed Alice's self-fulfillment, yet perpetuated Anna's self-fulfilling prophecy. This exemplified in different parts of the movie. We see how Anna uses the other person in conflict, therefore making herself out to be the victim.
To holistically evaluate the effects of Alzheimer's on individuals, we must look and understand how this affects the overall system. Let's delve into the reverberations of Alzheimer's in relation to patterning, wholeness, and organization.
Initially, the pattern leading up to Alice's diagnosis was seemingly out of character for Alice. Because Alice was a linguistics professor at the University of Columbia, this would make it especially unlikely for Alice to be at loss of words. This was a disruption of Alice's normal patterns of behavior.
If we take wholeness into account, Alice's now new pattern behavior and this disruption, we have to account for alternate relational implications. Because Alice became so aware of these changes in her own behavior, she sought professional help. This helped her better understand and evaluate these changes. Taking these actions, Alice was able to utilize interpersonal relationships in a system embedded in a larger network of relationships.
The different aspects of the system function as units. With this being said, Alice and her family were prompted to take the necessary steps towards the prevention and management of future conflict. By doing this, Alice and her family were engaging in her support systems.
One study that is inherently related toward our social systems and conflict analysis is the Harvard study of adult development. This study is the longest study of adult development that overviewed the lives of 724 men over the time span of 75 years. The study itself considers the cognitive impacts of loneliness. Ultimately, the study also recognizes the dependent aspects, good relationships, and social connections toward well-being and overall happiness.
So, making this relate to intrapersonal conflict, we kind of see throughout the movie how she starts from this idea of who am I, and we see it kind of develop into how Alzheimer's affects her relationships with other people, and in turns how Alzheimer's affects this level of loneliness. In her not understanding who she is, these relationships she has with other people, and the relationships she's developed over her life because she's lost her memory, we see this level of loneliness of not knowing who she is, not knowing where she is, and in turns it leaves her feeling extremely lonely. She has no idea where she is at any time. You know, she's having to have all this assistance by people that she's supposed to know but doesn't, which is a major internal conflict for her. How can we use this information on development to relate to what we've learned about interpersonal communication and conflict? What morphogenesis does is it allows us to use a constructive behavior to enable the system to grow and innovate. The only way for us to grow is by creating changes that are interrupting our scripts.
On the contrary, a morphostatic system is designed to sustain the status quo with no change. What we can relate is that it is best to adapt a balance between these two concepts. In terms of Alice's life, she did not exemplify balance between both of these styles.
Overall, our project was really to emphasize importance of quality relationships, memory, and how those things can form your own personal identity. And I think the movie does a really good way of representing that. As we see in The Good Life, cultivating good relationships with your family, your friends, people around you, cultivating those good relationships is what makes a prolonged life. So I think in terms of the movie, we see how Alice does cultivate those relationships kind of in different ways. I think we also see how she kind of takes for granted those relationships, but as she starts to develop Alzheimer's and we're starting to see these effects, we start to see how detrimental that is to not only her identity, but also her relationships with other people.
So just to reiterate what Kaylee was saying about relationship important they are, that she did do a really great job, and the family was very proactive, acknowledging that once they really knew that she did have the diagnosis and was able to sit down with the neurologist, they could see what steps they can take as far as medication, prolonging. They did touch on it in the movie as far as showing them step. There are certain scenes where Alice goes to a caretaker facility and sees where she would potentially stay. So something I wish I saw more of in the film is the uncontrollable and controllable risk factors. And it's something we did see in our research. Did see it a little bit as far as the genetic, where there was problems with the siblings as far as getting tested or not getting tested for the disease. As far as controllable factors, we did not see anything as far as Alice could partake in classes that are more intellectually stimulating. We did not see that in the film or any of that representation. I hope that this presentation shed more light and awareness to harsh realities of Alzheimer's and how it affects families and the system as a whole.